Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about D&D Influences by Edition. Mostly this is influences on me and my work, but in one case it's going to be my work influencing back into D&D, which I think is really cool. Anyway, this is response to YL333, who says, "Hey Tim, I don't know about others, but I would love to hear about which editions of D&D you've played, especially in the TSR days, what D&D books you own, and which editions are your favorite and have had the most influence on your games." I've done a lot of talking about D&D here and there, and I've done D&D stories and all that. I will talk about, and I've talked about influences, tabletop influences of non-D&D stuff. So let's just talk about Dungeons and Dragons. I have mentioned several times that the way I got introduced to Dungeons and Dragons was a little unusual. My mom worked at the Judge Advocate General of the U.S. Navy. She was a secretary, but she had another title because she had a very high security clearance. So she typed up classified documents for admirals. She came home one day and she said, "Hey, the boys at work are playing a game that I think you might enjoy." The boys were naval officers and the game was D&D. We went over one weekend, spent a Saturday playing it. I loved it. My mom knew exactly what I liked and what that I would enjoy it because it was just so imaginative and like no other game I'd ever played. And that's what got me going. In fact, she bought me this. This is, I still have it. My mom kept everything. It's awesome. This is the D&D basic set that I owned. I think it's from 1978. And I got it either in 78 or 79. That's what my original, if you watch my dice video, that's where the really, really bad dice came from. This is what got me going. It has the basic set booklet. It had some basic classes in it, very different than regular D&D. It had those polyhedral dice. It had a module in Search of the Unknown. I basically consumed this. Played with some friends from high school, and I wanted more, which is what got me into First Edition. First Edition is probably what I would consider to be my first D&D, real D&D love. The basic set, I probably spent a month in that. And then boom, I got a player's handbook, got a monster manual. The DM's guide wasn't out yet. When the DM's guide came out, I got that. So much influence on me as my very first tabletop role-playing game. I played so much in high school, played all 4 years, had long-running campaigns with 3 core friends and then a few other friends who would come in and out of the group. I learned so much stuff from playing D&D. We all tried being DM. That's where I learned some people aren't good at it. They don't see their role as being a storyteller and improvising and keeping the pace going. Like I said, one of them just tried to kill the players. That's what he thought his job was, kill the players. Some just weren't good at storytelling. Others, it would get mired down and you're like, why are we spending all of our time shopping? Shouldn't we be doing something? It's also where I learned 2 very early lessons that influenced every computer RPG I made ever since that. The first one is players never do what you expect, which is why you kind of need systemic rules and not scripted because they will break hard rules. You just want, here's how the world works, do what you want. Not, here are hard scripted rules to respond to everything you could possibly think of doing. And then the other one was the origin of dumb dialogue came from one of my D&D games and basically made me think more about what makes these kind of games fun. And it's not just necessarily being heroic. The failures were funny. The characters with flaws were fun. It was so much, getting a cursed item was fun. There was so much there that made me go, you can really look at this in a totally bigger way. Now, I should point out, not only did I own all the base books, but I bought a ton of modules, and I didn't have a lot of money, and I think everything, all my spare change, allowance money, and then later I got my first job at 16 in high school at a game company. Whatever didn't go into my college fund, I bought D&D stuff with. So I bought a lot of modules, and that's how I learned how to make my own adventures. I've got books full of my adventures that I made, lots of notes, lots of maps. It's where I got into Judges Guild. I've got a whole video about how Judges Guild was amazing for me to discover, because Judges Guild was a gigantic open world, and their stuff was designed completely differently. I would say orthogonally to TSR's modules. TSR's modules was here's a place, here's a bunch of room descriptions, and here's a relatively, not necessarily linear, but this is what we expect your players to do, and then there's a bad guy at the end. Judges Guild wasn't like that at all. It was, here's a whole open world. Go wherever you want. Do whatever you want. We have modules. We have dungeons and towers and cities and villages and ruins and artifacts just littered over this world. So to me, that was first edition. First edition kind of set my design, ethics isn't the right word, set my design flavor in stone. This is where I learned what it meant to be a designer. So, second edition. I didn't play it. I don't own the books. In fact, it's the only edition of D&D I don't own. I have a good reason for this. It came out in 1989 when I was in graduate school, and I had I'm talking zero spare money. I mentioned in graduate school, I think I lived on a grocery budget of $15 a week, which a lot of you are like, I can't even buy one meal with that. But it must have been a lot more in the late 80s. No. People were shocked when I said I've got $15 to spend on food this week. You buy a lot of components of food, flour, dried rice, dried beans, and you make a lot of stuff with that. Anyway, I didn't have any money to buy second edition, and I was having fun introducing a lot of my new graduate school friends to first edition. We played a ton of first edition games. It was super, super fun. Also, when I did start working at Interplay in 91, so I started having some spare cash, by then, second edition had felt like it was too much. It was a little cash grabby to me. It felt like they were going, let's make as many specialized books. Oh, you want to play D&D? Well, here are the base books, and then here's a bunch of like how to be a fighter, how to be a wizard, how to be a thief. It's like all these very specialized books, and all I wanted to do was sit down and play D&D. Now, I had friends who played it, and I would watch them play it. It was fairly popular at Interplay, and it's the environment into which I introduced GURPS. But I just stayed with first edition until about, I think we were finishing up Arcanum. Arcanum came out in 2001. I think the year before is when third edition came out. I loved it. I thought third edition was really a cool new modernization of first edition. First edition, TSR was sometimes said to stand for too many stupid rules, and first and second edition pushed that to the limit. I love third edition. It came back, it pulled things in, it codified things. I loved the feats, and later when I met with people from WotC, who had by then bought TSR, I was told feats were inspired from Fallout perks, and I was like, we've influenced D&D. One of my games influenced D&D, and that was amazing. Now, I started working on Temple in late 2001, early 2002, I think it was. I think it was very, very early 2002. Third edition had only been out for a year and a half. I thought it was completely safe to hard code these rules into a computer game because this is going to be around for 10 years, right? No. In 2003, right when I was in, 2/3 of the way through making Temple of Elemental Evil, 3.5 came out. Do not misunderstand me. It was a great improvement. I think classes and skills and feats all got improved and balanced. There were so many fixes to rules that were a little off and homebrew stuff you had to put in, or just clarifications, things that weren't clear, and they clarified it in 3.5. So it was a great addition. But you have to remember that it came out when I was trying to finish up Temple, and it was already miserable to try to get that game out in 18 months. They gave us an extra 2 months, during which I had a kidney stone. It was a nightmare getting that game out. You can watch my Temple of Elemental Evil timeline video. I love 3.5. I own all the 3.5 books. I think 3.5 is better than 3. I think it's an improvement on 3, and I already loved 3. So that should give you an idea there. 4th edition. I own it. I bought the books. I read it. I never played it. People at the office did, and I occasionally watched, or more often I'd chat with them about their sessions. 4th edition to me felt very video game influenced, and not in a good way. And I'm talking as a video game designer. I think tabletop is good at some things, and video games are good at others. And I think 4th edition was overly influenced by video games. I could go into detail there, but you know what? I'm not going to. I didn't play it. I don't consider myself an expert. Let's just say 4th edition wasn't for me. Which brings us to 5th edition. I own it. I've read all the books. I liked it. I've kind of played it. I've sat in on some sessions. I also watched people play online. I watched friends of mine play sessions online, and I sat in and watched. I liked it. I thought it was much better than 4. But if I was going to play a modern edition, I'd still rather play 3. Even though by now 3 was over 20 years old. Even 3.5 was over 20 years old. At the time of this video, which is in October of 2024, the new 5th edition came out. I don't know what they're calling it. I don't know whether they're calling it 5.5 or new 5th. They just called it D&D, which I think is a horrible naming strategy. But I've just decided at this point, D&D has now gone off in its own direction. It's its own thing now. It's how I sort of think about Fallout. I made the original Fallouts. Fallout's gone off and done its own thing now. I like a lot of it. I don't like some of it. Same thing with D&D. Because sometimes I look at D&D and I wonder if it's lost something from its roots. I look at it and I wonder, do people still play simple characters that just, here's my character. I'm a wizard apprentice. I'm a brand new fighter. I'm going to go into a dungeon and get wealthy. I'm going to beat up the monsters and take their loot. A lot of them nowadays seem to like, here's my character. And their background is complicated. I'm misunderstood. And I believe the villain is misunderstood. He's not evil. He's just misunderstood. I get it. I've made video games that play with tropes. But sometimes it feels like the modern ones, that's all they do is play with tropes. And I'm like, hey, to each their own. I'm not bad-mouthing 5th. If you love 5th, great. That's your edition. I love, in fact, the things that D&D has gained over the years. A little part of me laments some of the things that got lost. Now, right now, that'd be a perfect time to talk about Pathfinder, which pretty much stayed around 3rd edition. Dungeon Crawl Classics, which I own and have read and have several modules and world books on. I have Empire of the East and Dying Earth Dungeon Crawl Classic books. We could talk about OSR. I have several OSR books. I own them. I read them. I love some of the new rule sets. I love the modernization. I love a new take on things. I love the fresh ideas. And they tend to capture some of the old school stuff better. But guess what? That's not D&D, and that's not what today's video is about. So I'm going to stop there. So I hope this answered your question, YL333.